Hey folks, this is Rhykker. With all the leaks, rumors, and inferences we can make, it's all but confirmed by Blizzard that there has been a Diablo 4 game in the works for some time. Now, whether or not it'll ever see the light of day is another question. But some rumors suggest that Diablo 4 will be an MMORPG, an action RPG game like Diablo 3, but with some MMO elements. And in this video, we'll discuss how best a Diablo 4 game can incorporate MMO elements. Because if we're going to take the existing Diablo formula, but put an MMO twist on it, then there needs to be a reason, there needs to be value added. So we're going to explain here and discuss, in my opinion, how MMO elements can be implemented in a way that adds value, that makes the game better and not worse. And most importantly, how we can include these elements and still make the game feel like a Diablo game. But right before we get into that discussion, I just want to quickly talk about another MMORPG called Black Desert Online, and thank Kiskaloo Games for sponsoring this video. Now, if you somehow missed the huge hype train surrounding this game when it first released, you might still be aware of it from its awesomely in-depth character editor. I mean, you can even make Michael Jackson. I don't know why you'd want to, but you could. But to further elaborate, it's a sort of open-world sandbox MMORPG, and it's just a huge, seamless world. The combat isn't just about popping cooldowns, it's an action combat system that involves aiming and combos and dodging. Its graphics speak for itself, and if you like anime, playing this game is basically living an anime. There's lots of stuff to do in the game aside from just fighting enemies. There's an economy, there's a housing system, there's crafting, there's life skills like fishing, there's even naval warfare. And we've just seen a new archer class released this week. And if you want to check out this game with a 7-day free trial, you can follow the link in the video description. Alright, so let's dive into the meat of this discussion. If the next Diablo game, or if a future Diablo game were to be an MMO action RPG, or at least have some form of MMO elements, how best can we realize this? Well, one thing to bear in mind is that in the case of Diablo 2, the devs had intended to implement something that they, I believe, colloquially referred to as BattleNet Town. And what this effectively was a form of MMO town hub. They unfortunately didn't have time to realize this plan, and instead we got the system that we ended up getting, which was the BattleNet interface, wherein you log in and you see game lobbies, and there's a chat interface. But one small aspect of this BattleNet town was retained, and that's that what do you see when you log in? A whole bunch of characters at the bottom. You see all the characters that are currently being selected by players at the bottom in the chat. So there's already, even though you're in a server browser, there's this sense of, oh, I'm not alone. I'm playing a multiplayer game and I'm not alone. There's a community. I can see faces. I can see characters. I can see the other people around. So it's almost like being in a town or a manifestation of a town. But I believe truly what they wanted, and I might be a little wrong about this, but it seems the spirit of what they wanted was a full-fledged town that people would load into and then walk around in the town with everyone else on the server and interact, speak this way, and organize joining games together this way. Now, we see this very much in MMORPGs, and we also see it, for instance, in Path of Exile uses a town hub system. For all intents and purposes, Path of Exile is otherwise a regular multiplayer game, but the town hubs are MMO style, in that even if you're playing by yourself, you load into a town hub and there are other people around. Now, perhaps the most important aspect of an MMORPG is the community. Without a community, an MMO dies. And I feel that this is largely true as well for action RPGs. There are a lot of great action RPGs that did not have a thriving multiplayer scene, and because of that, they've sort of faded away. Torchlight 2 is a classic example of an excellent action RPG, but its multiplayer scene, due to having a certain lack of community features, never quite kicked off in the same way that some of these other action RPGs did, and so today it's sort of faded into obscurity. That's not a slight to the game, and I know some of you are still playing it, but no one can argue the fact that popularity-wise, it's not even on the radar anymore. Community is a very important factor in a game's longevity, and having an MMO town hub is a way of reinforcing that community, making people not feel so lonely and encouraging social interaction. I believe town hubs in a future Diablo game would be a good idea. Next, I'm going to address the most contentious part and the biggest topic we'll cover in this video, and it's the open world side of things. So for instance, in Path of Exile, while the town hubs are MMO style, once you go anywhere else, it is instanced. More so, it is a private instance. You're never going to run into random people. It's only going to be people that are in your party or that you otherwise invite into the instance with you. Whereas, as we all know, in an MMORPG, you walk out into the world and there's tons of strangers there milling about, doing their stuff, people that are not in your party, not on your friends list, not in your clan, just random people. And this is where things get tricky, because when you have this sort of system, you have to design the areas in a certain way, and it is a very common trope in MMORPGs that enemies, monsters, have aggro ranges. You have flocks of monsters here and there, and you can see them, and you can, if you don't want to engage, just run around them, and it gives the world an overall very docile feel to it. And that is the exact opposite of what the world of Diablo feels like. Diablo has a hostile world. Yes, in Diablo 2 and 3, in the first few areas, the first area you get into once you leave town, the monsters have shorter aggro ranges. They're less likely to come running at you, but that's because the game is easing you into things. Because by the end of the game, as soon as something appears on screen, it's because it's charging at you. And this sort of system simply cannot work if you have dozens of strangers sharing the same area. Because all it takes is one dude to run out and all the monsters start charging at him, and then what about all the other couple dozen people? Worse yet, you often see in MMORPGs something that I consider to be very bad design, and that's players competing over resources, with the resource tending to be monsters or a boss. This is very common, especially in the more starter zones, where you have quests to kill 10 of this monster. So you go to find this specific type of monster, and you find that there are a bunch of other players there also doing the same thing, and so you're just waiting for the monsters to respawn, be it the monsters or be it even a boss. You're just waiting for the respawn, and it's whoever gets the last hit gets credit. And while some games do this better, wherein as long as you contribute a hit, then you get credit towards your quest, it's still not something that translates well into the world of Diablo, because again, it gives a very docile feel to the world when you have a number of people just standing around, waiting for monsters to respawn and instantly slaying them. In my opinion, that's just not good design. Players competing over resources in this fashion should be avoided at all costs. I think back to the game MMO Online, an MMORPG, and there are basically two things to do in this game. There's the open world aspect and then the dungeons. And the open world aspect I very much did not like because of all the issues that I just highlighted. Players competing over resources. But the dungeons were awesome. You find a dungeon, you queue up for it, and then you go in as a party, and together you're killing all the monsters, and that was really fun. Remember, we want having multiple players in the game to enhance the experience. We're making this an MMO to enhance things, not take away from the experience. And as the old Diablo mantra goes, the minions of hell grow stronger when others join the game. Whereas in an open world instance in an MMO, the minions of hell effectively grow weaker because you just have more people and the monsters don't change in any way, so the world becomes more docile. So I feel I've highlighted what I believe to be the problem well enough, so let's start brainstorming solutions. Well, one solution would be to have the open world areas be instanced as well, and you can either join it solo or join it as a party, or even queue up for it as you would a dungeon and then join as a public party. That could be of larger size, but at least you're all going in together with a common goal. You're gonna plow through all those monsters. Think of it as just a massive rift, right? A Diablo 3 rift that's all one massive level. And now you're not competing with each other because you're all together. Even if you're just strangers who queued up, you all have the same goal, you all get rewarded, and you're all progressing through that same content. You can fill the zone with monsters, and they can come charging at the whole party because you've all started at the same area and you're moving along together. Now, another way to do this, or perhaps even in addition to this, you can have on your map, imagine at some point you see, alright, in the outskirts of Tristram, a notification appear, Hell Rift, opening in 5 minutes. And this is a sort of global announcement, and now you have all kinds of people zoning in to this public area that otherwise is devoid of monsters in order to tackle this event. You have 5 minutes to locate where that Hell Rift is going to open before waves of minions of hell start pouring out and just rampaging across the countryside. And who knows, maybe there's even civilians running for their lives. And the more people zone in, the more waves of minions, or in some way the difficulty ramps up. But everyone who's in this zone gets rewarded with XP and items. And again, it's all a common goal. You feel like you're part of a community, part of something bigger. It doesn't matter if other people killed monsters before you can get there. Think of it sort of like Diablo 2 bail runs on a much grander scale. Anyway, I'm not saying to go with exactly these ideas, but thinking along the lines of not having players compete over resource, keep these open world zones hostile and not docile, make the world feel like town hubs are points of light in a world of darkness. That is how Diablo should feel. Then, of course, all the forms of dungeons and raids that we see in MMOs all translate very well into Diablo. I do believe, though, that because Diablo has historically been a game that you can play solo, that you should be able to solo most of the content, and if there are going to be specific raid-only events, to maybe keep that a little bit limited because we don't want to exclude those players that really prefer to play solo. So all the main quest events, all of that should be soloable, but definitely do include some ancillary, some supplementary content that does require big group participation. And speaking of that, let's talk a bit about class roles. Now, very typically in an MMORPG, you have classes that do different things in a group. You have your healer, you have your tank, you have your DPS, and every class falls into one of these buckets. Now for Diablo 2, there was a planned second expansion that ended up getting scrapped that was going to introduce a dedicated support class called the Cleric. It was going to be Diablo's first full dedicated support character. But then for Diablo 3, the new team decided we want every class to be a DPS class. And I believe that is keeping in spirit with what Diablo is and has been. Every class is a DPS class, or at least can be a DPS class. Let support builds emerge as a consequence of player experimentation, without it being a design intent by the devs. Currently in Diablo 3, even in Path of Exile, despite there being no proper support classes, we see some very powerful support builds, and anyone playing at the highest levels of play knows that you have to bring in a support character, at least one, in order to optimize your effectiveness. And all this happens without even having a dedicated support class. So I think that keeping with the current class structure that we've been seeing historically in Diablo would be fine without having to create dedicated support classes. Because as soon as you create a dedicated support class, then that's going to be the only support character. Because one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to be the only support character, which is going to kill diversity and become very boring, or DPS classes that don't specialize in support will somehow have better support builds than the dedicated support character, meaning the dedicated support character is underpowered. Alright, next let's talk about trading, and this is something that some of you may have already heard me discuss, but in the past I was pretty opposed to trading. I didn't like trading in any game, really. I especially didn't like trading in Diablo 2. I didn't like that it was a very kind of Wild West, free-for-all type of system. The auction house in Diablo 3 I used extensively because it was completely impersonal. But then when Blizzard effectively killed all form of trading, I was actually happy when they killed trading in Diablo 3. And I was wrong to think that that was a good decision. After having a talk with David Brevik, which some of you may have seen in an interview a couple years ago now, he explained that he believes that a trading system in which some items can always be traded, some can never be traded, and others have restrictions on either how much they can be traded or how often they can be traded, is the way to go. And I've come around and agreed with this. And for the most part, I largely agree that having a trade system is important because it's important, again, to community. Having a trading system makes you interact with other players, and even if you don't really partake, it makes you feel as though you're part of something bigger, that there are other players out there. And again, anything that reinforces the community aspect of a game helps keep that game alive in the long run. Now, I will add that I believe the principal failure of the auction house in Diablo 3 was the fact that the by far easiest way to gear up was to play the auction house and not play the game. The vast majority of my time playing Diablo 3 throughout vanilla, which was every day, I'd be playing basically every day, was spent on the auction house, buying and selling, flipping items, because the drop rates on any good form of item were so abysmally low, and it was orders of magnitude more effective to flip your way to good gear. Because of that, I feel that the best items in the game should not be tradable. Now, what that means exactly is up for discussion. That might mean that, yes, maybe the base version of the item is tradable, but then you can augment that in some ways that you have to do by yourself, be it through crafting or performing certain quests or what have you. But given that such an integral part of the Diablo experience is the hedonic treadmill of just chasing and chasing after that next upgrade and the next upgrade and the next upgrade, to be able to be simply given your endgame gear by a friend, by a clanmate, or basically for free by a stranger, kills a huge part of the fun of the game, because once you get all that, and if there's nothing left to upgrade on your gear, then what now? Yes, you can leave it to just killing monsters, but such a huge part of Diablo is the loot, is on becoming stronger and stronger. And likewise, if the most effective way to get all your endgame gear is to simply buy it off the auction house, then we're encouraging players to spend their time in the auction house rather than actually playing the game, which again is bad design. Now, I touched briefly upon clans, and I believe that a Diablo MMO should have a very robust clan and clan hall system. Give us a reason to be part of a clan more than just a social experience. Give us clan halls, a physical representation of our clan space, something that we can upgrade, work together to make bigger, make more lavish and extravagant, lots of cosmetic stuff, and maybe even some degree of utility in the form of, be it shared craftsmen or some kind of benefit that doesn't make it punishing to not be in a clan. Because again, we need to consider the solo players. Maybe something wherein, imagine we have the jeweler, the blacksmith, and the mystic. Well, it's maybe a lot more difficult to level these guys up, and if you're in a guild, then you can sort of share your craftsmen. So maybe I'll level up my blacksmith to max level, you level up your jeweler to max level, and then we'll share our craftsmen. This is something that a solo player can still do, it'll just take more time. They can still level up independently their own craftsmen to max level. And as an extension of that, as an extension of guild halls, having player housing, I think, which is something we tend to see in MMOs, is also a good idea. This is something that we also see in Path of Exile, and it's used to great effect. The guild halls, the player housing, these are things that help us feel like we're part of this world, and by getting to visit other people's player homes, for instance, you again get to feel more like you're part of this community, and it also creates that sense of benign envy where, oh, well, you've decorated your house quite well, I want to work on mine more now. And I think it would also be cool if somehow, I don't know how exactly, but somehow we can integrate into the town hubs the exterior of your player house, where you don't just design the interior, but the exterior as well. And maybe I'm actually going to reference Fallout 76 in a positive way here, but my understanding of Fallout 76 is when you've built up your camp, when you leave the server, your camp poofs away, and then when you rejoin the server, it poofs back into existence. So maybe we can have some kind of a system where in a town hub, when you are logged in, your house poofs in over a sort of a default house. Maybe there can be default houses that just have a typical appearance, and then a player house will be much more visually impressive or visually distinct. So as you're walking by, you can see other players' houses, and then you see your own house, and you can enter your own house. And again, I don't know how exactly to implement this, but it is just a small thought towards player housing. This way, as you're walking around the town, you can see, oh, that's so-and-so's house. Maybe you even start to recognize people's houses, just as you would start to recognize people themselves, and it helps you feel, again, like you're in a community. And while we're talking about communities, we have to talk about tribalism, which is an innate part of human nature and has been always. For the Horde, for the Alliance, nothing gets people quite riled up as much as rivalries and rooting for your team. Go, local sports team, go! It's completely illogical, but it is a thing. So having your character tied to one of two or more factions, I believe, is important to helping build that camaraderie with your own faction and helping build rivalry, which again lets you further feel like you're integrated in a community. And I personally feel that three-way conflict is far more interesting than two-way conflict. So I believe ideally having 3 separate factions is the way to go. And there's plenty of opportunity within the world of Diablo to have 3 separate factions. For instance, during the Sin War, we had the Triune, the Cathedral of Light, and the Eterim. And if you have any idea what those are, I encourage you to check out my Diablo lore videos. And I think it would be really cool and even important to have events that help shape the way this 3-way war goes on. Let the community feel like their actions on a community scale can impact the way this war is going. Remember earlier how we were talking about 5 minutes before a Hell Rift opens and then people have to zone in to fight the Hell Rift? Well, imagine if that could also be an extension of this clan war system, or sorry, not clan war, faction war system. Now imagine if as a faction, or rather even as an individual player in a faction, activities that you do in-game, which could be as simple as how many enemies you killed, or how many forgotten souls you've gotten from salvaging uniques. But whatever it is, something that you can do to contribute towards unleashing a rift on an enemy encampment. And maybe once your faction reaches that goal, a big vote pops up and you get to vote on which area to summon it, which enemy encampment you want to summon the rift on, and whichever place gets the most votes, that's where the rift is going to open. And depending on your faction, maybe you have a faction that sympathizes with the burning hells, so that's going to unleash demons. Or maybe you're a faction that sympathizes with corrupt angels like Malthael, the sort of corruption of good, of all humans must be destroyed because they are born from evil. So it's a portal that sends a bunch of corrupt angels. Or maybe you're a third faction that sympathizes with Rothmon, maintaining the balance, so it's undead that are sent. Since undead are not inherently evil, they're effectively neutral, they just tend to be used by evil people, but they don't have to be. And then if the enemy faction does not successfully defend, maybe your faction even takes over that area. There's so many possibilities here when we're talking about cross-faction conflict. One important thing, though, is to ensure that players are not forced to participate. It's something that's happening and you can take part, but if you choose to ignore this, it's not going to have a major effect on your day-to-day. But it is something that is ongoing and you're at least aware of it to help you feel like you're part of this greater world, part of this community. Now, another thing we tend to see in MMOs is life skills like farming or professions, and honestly, I don't believe there's any place for this in a Diablo game. Again, Diablo needs to feel hostile, and can you feel like the world is hostile if you're sitting at a pond fishing? That works great in other MMORPGs. I don't think there's a place for it in Diablo. Stuff like crafting or anything related to enhancing or enchanting your gear, sure, but not chopping down trees and tending to sheep. And then lastly, I just want to touch upon something that you often see in MMOs as well, which tends to be events. Recurring events, irregular events, just lots of events tend to be ongoing, and they're incentives for players to log in. Oh, I want to participate in this event, maybe get this cosmetic, maybe just, partake in this short-lived activity. And Diablo 3 has a couple of those. We have the anniversary event, which is really fun, and then we have the King Kanai event, which, well, it's an homage to a Blizzard employee who passed away, but there isn't a whole lot to the event once you've done it once. And I think we should just have more events, maybe even make them shorter. I know that part of the design reason behind having events last so long in Diablo 3 and not having more events, or at least my impression is that Diablo 3 is designed to be very inclusive, and they don't want people to have to miss out on an event. They don't want people to have to feel forced to, oh, you know, I don't have time this month to log in and complete the event, or maybe I could log in, but I don't have enough time to complete the Darkening of Tristram event, for instance. And with respect, I feel like a lot of this reasoning is, we don't want our players to feel very incentivized to log in every week. I guess I get that the design intent is that, you know, Diablo 3 is a more casual game, but I think it is a good idea to give players more incentive to log in on a weekly basis, rather than fewer incentives to log in on a weekly basis. You know, even if it's events that maybe you don't have to complete something very in-depth, but at least like logging in just a bit, at least once a week, I think is something that should be encouraged in a future Diablo game. I think asking people to log in once a week isn't a big ask. We're not saying 10 hours a week here, and I think people who can't even log in for once a week would be at least understanding if they're gonna miss an event because of that, and at least if they know, well, there's gonna be a bunch more events throughout the year, so I don't feel as bad about missing this event. It's not like it's a, you know, one event in the whole year and I missed it. But otherwise, that's gonna wrap up my thoughts here. But really, this is a discussion, and I encourage you all to post your thoughts, even if you disagree with me. I'd love to know why, and I'd love to know your reasons, because believe me, I'm under no illusion that I think I know best or have the best ideas here, and you often contribute a lot of wonderful ideas, and I'm looking forward to reading them. So that's gonna wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider becoming a Royal Raider on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated. We've got a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.